everyone, my name is AJ Day, and this is my police brutality trauma research presentation. So, like I just said, my name is AJ. That's me in that picture. The arrow's pointing to it, just in case you can't find it. I'm a second year biology major with a double minor in English and women's gender sexuality studies, and I'm currently working on a graphic design minor. Fingers crossed that happens before graduation. I currently only have a couple summers to fit that in. So let's go back to where this all started. I went on a dialogue last summer in Barcelona, Spain, and it was called Gender and Gentrifying Public Spaces. It was really cool because I learned a lot of things tied to sociology study that I wouldn't have otherwise learned in my biology major. I included this because this is very crucial to the research that I'm participating in right now. So Spain was cool, it was fun. My friends and I had a lot of fun. It was a good time. I've included pictures so that you guys can see how beautiful it is. So there are 3 things that we learned about which are still important to my research going on right now. The first thing is ethnography, which is a type of research study in which you are integrated into the space and you are making conjectures and observations about what's going on around you. And the second thing is coding, which usually comes from ethnography or any type of sociology research study. Now, this isn't the coding that people often talk about when they're like, oh, put it on your resume, like computers, Python, blah, blah, blah. I don't know much about computers, but this is a different type of coding where you engage in nomenclature. And we'll talk about this in a second. And then, of course, just as the title of the dialogue said, we learned about gender and gentrification, which are both very important things to me, and that's why I went on the dialogue in the first place. So, coding, again, is probably the most important thing that we learned on the dialogue, but we're going to get back to that in a second, just like I said. So, on that dialogue, I met Professor Sylvia Dominguez, who is currently my what is it called? Like the person that you report to for your research? Yeah, she's that. So she told me that she was doing a research lab on campus after we came back from the dialogue. And she's like, I really like you. I was like, I really like you too. And she's like, join me in my research study. And I was like, what is it about? So this first bullet point answers that question. And the research question for the study is, what is the relationship around the culture of how police interact with civilians and how civilians view police? Could this spark a response? Could it be activism? Could trauma come from this? If so, are there coping methods that we need to study? There's the question, do we as a culture generally like police? Do we dislike? Are we different? Is there a divide? Why? So if you're familiar with the term sociology, it is a social science, so how people are studied in their interactions. So that's basically, this is a perfect sociology study. So I was like, cool, I'll be involved in this lab. So where do I come in, you might be asking? So while we were going through the responses, what happened was we sent out a survey to a bunch of academics, a bunch of peoples and scholars, and they gave us responses about how they feel about questions asked such as, what do you get when you view police brutality? What do you see in the future of police brutality? What is your relationship around it? What are your feelings around it? And I personally noticed that there were a lot of comments about social media and news. So this first response says, I did not learn about it from watching media, but from talking to parents and families of those killed by police. The second response is, I think what can be most equally as upsetting and disturbing as viewing the actual videos is seeing the comments that viewers leave, justifying it. The third response here says, it is emotionally exhausting. I find myself not wanting to see the videos, listen to the news, or read about it. The last one says, I avoid the news. So I went further and I saw even more similar responses like experiencing trauma, sadness and anxiety. I'm crying as I write this. It's a worry for me. I feel enraged. I stay away from these videos. And then that birthed the police brutality trauma research. So now I'm going to actually take you into the research that I'm currently doing. So the focus is on these three things: trauma, coping, and social media. The research question that I have right now is, what is the relationship between the high volume of police brutality exposure on social media and how/whether Black individuals' approach to coping with this is its own racialized experience? So these are three themes that I found in the survey responses that were sent out to the academics used in Professor Dominguez's research that we're doing together. And like I said earlier, there are these three things that I found consistently throughout the responses. There was trauma, and the questions that I wanted to ask featuring trauma were: where does this trauma come from? Why is it important? What does this do for future police and civilian interaction? There was coping. How does one cope with this kind of trauma? Is it copable? Is there community coping? And then the biggest thing is social media. What does social media have to do with it? So these are all different questions that all went into my research question, which is like, where does the high volume of police brutality exposure connect to what could be the racialized experience of how Black individuals approach to it? Now, just a disclaimer, something that I learned in actually my contemporary poetry class this semester was the difference between damage-centered research and like other research. And I've learned that damage-centered research is based on like exploiting the trauma of certain peoples, but the protocols that we've taken, which have been approved by the International Review Board, shout out to Nan Regina, make sure that those things aren't happening in the study. So I'm going to guide you on how the study is occurring in the next slide. Coding. Just like I said, we would talk about this. So now I'm going to tell you how the survey is used in my research and why coding is important. So the first thing that you do when you do sociology coding is you read the document or whatever type of files that you've accrued based on your observations. So in this case, we have a survey sent out to like thousands of academics, and the first thing that we do is we scan for themes. So we give these themes abbreviated names, or what we call codes. So for the example in this study, the word sadness and anxiety elicit the code feelings, which is abbreviated here, FLNGS. And so you write that down near where you find the words sadness and anxiety or themes relating to that. Words relating to that. Then this becomes your focus of research. You organize the codes into overarching themes. This helps you establish patterns and commonalities in the document / response / whatever you are reading over for your research. The third thing that you do is you then develop overarching themes. So like first you started with sadness and anxiety, then you could develop those things into overarching, you organize the codes into different parts in which you're going to look back on so that you can pull from them to make an overarching theme. So this actually is a very important step because it leads you to the overall research question. This helps you establish overall themes that help lead to your overall paper. Codes can lead to secondary codes, which are just more specific. And then finally, you use your code book, which is literally all the codes that you accrued from your research to provide proof for whatever your research question is going to answer. So this helps you provide a skeleton for your presentation method. Your code book gives you proof / details for your presentation method. I hope that wasn't super duper confusing, but if it was, I'm going to explain in the next couple of slides. So, like here, this was one of the responses in the survey sent out, and just another disclaimer, all the responses were very anonymous, and these people agreed to having the responses used in their research, so I'm allowed to show this to you right now. So, this response says, I stopped viewing these images in order to not experience trauma. I know many folks who limit their visual exposure. I do this even though police brutality is core to my research area. I make a point of watching only once and then looking away to protect my psyche and not allowing the violence to consume me. So, there are a lot of things going on in this response, and as you can see, there are codes written at the end of the response. So TRM is trauma, RPOL equals role of police, BNED equals benefit of education, and COLT is collateral trauma. So you literally just go through each sentence and you write down, oh, I stopped viewing these images in order to not experience trauma. This codes for trauma, so let me write that at the end of this response. I do this even though police brutality is core to my research area. RPOL, role of police, write that at the end of the response. I make a point of only watching once and then looking away. So yes, that's basically how this happens. So the codebook themes that I've developed so far, like I said, are coping, trauma, and social media. So now what? What do I do now? You may be asking so many questions, like how could this research be carried out? How do you know that the people in this response are Black people, because that is the focus of my research? Blah, blah, blah. why aren't you here today? I have class. Um, Basically, what I'm going to do next are interviews. So, this is something that's very core to sociology research, and I learned this. All of the things that I'm doing right now are things that I learned on my dialogue. So, shout out to what is it called? Global education or whatever Northeastern likes to call it. Shout out to that. So, interviews, very important. Um, we are doing semi-structured interview, which means it's not super duper structured, but it's also not just like people talking to me and writing down things. So I have questions, and if they want to deviate, then I can probe if I want, and I can also write down the responses that come from it. So the research question that I would be asking them is, how do they cope with police brutality over social media? So the questions that I'm asking the participants are, how often do you come across police brutality on social media? In what social media do you see the most of this content? How do you identify racially? Does watching this content affect you? Questions like that. Because what I'm going to do, and this has been approved from the IRB board, is I'm going to put up flyers all over campus. You may have already seen some, like in the bathroom stalls at Ryder, for example. Not of mine, but of other research participation studies in which people can call a number or a hotline or something like that, and they can go for an interview. And part of the funding that this nifty grant gave me was for me to give them Amazon gift cards and T-passes for them to come here and answer these questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to record these responses, write them down, and then code them and integrate them with the responses from the survey on coping, trauma, and social media, and write a big fat research paper. So from here on out, like I just said, I'm going to code this information received from the interviews, integrate into the responses coded from the survey, write a research paper, and who knows, create a film about it, because why not? I got research grant money. Gotta make the most of it. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, you could always email me at addae@husky.neu.edu, which is addae.a at husky blah blah blah. Thank you so much for watching my research presentation. I hope you all are having a wonderful time with yours, and email me if you have any questions. Thanks so much, and bye.